Oh yeah, the only thing to add to it too is sort of around that kind of those newer, kind of more subtler forms of criminalization is this, there's a concept of like social profiling. And it's sort of it sort of definitely overlaps with the idea of racial profiling. But it's this idea that, certain people have kind of markers on the, attributes or characteristics, visible characteristics that mark them as out of place. So that might be the kind of scraggly beard or the shopping cart. And so what that means is that person is sort of gets additional police attention, not because they're doing anything criminal, specifically criminal, but they're just sort of out of place. And then some of those other kind of policies and pieces of legislation start to kind of come into play. And so, and one of the things that we kind of, that comes up for me when I think of this is sort of a story about this young person. They were staying at a shelter, and they were kind of then sort of congregating across the road at some park. And so they're hanging out there, and I think some of the people are drinking, and there's kind of a big crowd. And then I think suddenly a plainclothes police officer kind of came into the mix and started kind of, kind of ordering people around, and kind of, a bit of a scuffle kind of broke out, and this police officer ended up getting pushed. And obviously I don't know all the specifics about it, but it's sort of this, the police officer was just kind of interested in them because they were sort of, maybe being a bit rowdy or were kind of out of place. But then the police officer comes over to kind of talk to them or intervene. Then something unfortunate sort of happens, some weird circumstance plays out. And now that young person I was talking with now has a very serious assaulting a police officer charge. And so if that goes through, I mean, that's going to be a real sort of barrier for them. And so, when you get that increased police attention, it just sort of increases your chances of something happening and you getting some kind of charge. And I sort of, one of the stories I use with my students to kind of get this social profiling and this kind of over policing, right? We talk about how certain groups of people, because of their race or the way they look, are over policed. And so it means they're getting more police attention than someone else. And so you might have two people walking down the street with a little bit of drugs in their pocket. One of them sort of is very sort of cleanly dressed. They're on their way to kind of a party after work. And they're not likely to get much police attention, and that drugs is not likely to be found. But then you have another person with that same amount of drugs also planning to use it recreationally, but they're sort of more visible. There may be, have some other markers that draw the police's attention, and they are the person who's likely to get that drugs found in their pocket. And so you have two people doing the exact same thing, but then you end up with very sort of different life paths and like sort of different circumstances that come from it. And then we talk a lot about sort of how once a person's kind of criminalized to start, it kind of ends up sort of creating a bit of a snowball effect, right? So, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of going on here. I like this stuff, but one of the things that sort of you can end up happening is you have a young, for young people, but it could be adults as well, where, you get a charge, then you have trouble showing up for court, whether you kind of misplace the piece of paper, get confused about the plan, forget, who knows. You don't go, and then another charge will get added on to that one, now because you didn't show up, right? So there's that failure to comply thing. And so, and then, we know that a lot of young people who have a failure to comply end up, if they get arrested again, they're more likely to get remanded. So rather than getting kind of sent home or to wherever they are living, they're then put into kind of remand custody where they await to go for court. And then, so there's just like, there's a loss of liberty there, right? They haven't been found guilty of anything yet, but still they're in some sort of incarceration. And it's just sort of this kind of accumulating of charges and this accumulating of this sort of legal status around them. And then, I think that for me, that also sort of is part of this conversation about criminalization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Makes me think of how different homelessness can appear in like urban areas, rather than or against like friggin' what am I saying? Word. Oh, I just lost it. Like smaller towns, right? Yeah, so you have that huge difference where you know, a person in the community can call and say, well, I just seen these people, they've been on the bench for 2 hours, and all of a sudden, you know, you have the cops coming down to have that conversation and move them along and then ask them what they're doing, and like have all of that, you know, that questioning happening. But yet if you were in the city, it might not look that way, right?
That's
So
right. That's right.
it's just, it still blows my mind, like, even though I've been doing this for so long, and it's just, it's appearance, you know, like you said, you can be using the same recreational drug and with the same amount, and it's the appearance that's going to draw the attention, which is so very unfair.
No, right. And I remember sort of talking to young people who sort of think of that and recognize that sort of as a skill, right? And so if you're sort of a bit more experienced, or you know, for whatever reason, you can kind of, you know, pass, for lack of a better word. There's some people
Mm-hmm.
that blend into the kind of normal ebbs of flow in life and just aren't as, you know, likely to kind of get that additional police attention. Whereas there's other people, for various reasons, have more trouble kind of blending in, and they just get more attention. And there's no difference in what they're actually doing. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's a great point. And you're right that I think there is these important kind of rural, urban kind of differences about how that all plays out. Yeah, 100%.
absolutely.